Bullshit.
It's the No BS Marketing Show. I'm your host, Dave Mastovich, having a special conversation with someone who's made a big impact on my leadership style and my communication approach. It's George Hartnett, who we were able to work together doing a turnaround of a healthcare system when I was in my 20s. And George was mentioning in episode 1 his background and talked about his first job and how he had a leader with a moral compass. And it's funny because my kids have heard me use the term moral compass, and I know I picked that up from you mentioning a lot. He then talked about Raymond Hearn, who was on the board of governors of the Federal Reserve, and the impact he had on him. George gets his education, goes into the service, spends time in Korea near the DMZ, comes out, gets a master's of hospital administration, which after that you get a residency while you're finishing that master's. And that put him at a hospital, did the residency, went on to another hospital, helped grow that, came back to the place where he did the residency, spent some time there. And then he talked about how he had the opportunity then while there to, on the side, which I talk a lot about to our listeners, that find something you're passionate about, begin doing it on the side because it can turn into something. And that's what happened with Mass Solutions for me. And that's what happened with Modern Management for George, who became a vice president running their health services division and doing a lot of labor relations type work. And he's still doing that now. And he used the line that he used to use back in the day when we were talking to board members that were he used to use the phrase, well, he's in the winter of his career, and we have to talk to him because he's long of tooth and silver of mane, and we have to get that board member to maybe resign, or we have to get this surgeon to maybe leave the chairman role and things like that. So, George, those terms, I think, stuck with me because I've talked a lot about people being in the winter of their career or time for change. But what I want to focus on real quick is, at the tail end of episode 1, you were bringing up how when you're in a situation, whether it's the labor relations situation or it's the turnaround where you're having to convince people that maybe this isn't where they need to be. And you made a point that has stuck with me from when you told me that back when I was in my 20s is many times that person who's clinging to the job security that they have and they're fighting change, they don't even realize that for their own personal health, the move to leave is needed. And there was one of those that happened when you and I were together, when you made a move and I moved into the number 2 role, and you had a person that was probably healthier once they left, but they just didn't realize it because we all are so inherently resistant to change. Touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that you want to be fair to people and give them the opportunity, and it's never an enjoyable thing to make a change, particularly somebody who's been around a while in an organization. But, healthcare, as we mentioned earlier, has changed very rapidly, and it continues to change. So the old models of letting people who are technically qualified to be elevated to positions of leadership just because they have breathing rights seems to me to be the wrong way to make a decision. Now, how that's assessed and how you get that accomplished and how that's sold in an organization, it depends upon the individual. Some people will accept that if they're confronted with the idea that this is something that's not working out and here's why. Most people do resist it, though. They feel angry and they get very frustrated and you owe me, and because I have breathing rights over somebody else, therefore I should be entitled to that particular position. And I find that oftentimes causes some major labor issues in organizations where people who are supervisors are not equipped, and it's not fair to them, whether they realize it or not, to put them in positions of responsibility to oversee others when they can't get the job accomplished. One of the things that I did, I think this is kind of an article I wrote. It was interesting. If you think about it, when there's a change needed in an organization, let's assume a supervisor, Joe, leaves and he's off on to his position in someplace and maybe he retires to go out to Seattle where people don't get old, they just rust. But so we head out that way. And now to replace that particular person, I think one of the simple things you could do as a department head, for example, is to meet with the staff that person had responsibility for and take the job description, redraft it, pass it out to the individual employees and say, take a look at this. This is what I think the job that Joe had, who's now retired, includes. Take a look at it. And outside of the punctuation errors, did we in fact capture what you believe that job to be all about? And you're going to get some pretty good suggestions. And the suggestions are, then if they're adaptable, put it back in there. But then you say, let's take a look at what's not on that job description that I'm really looking for in the selection process that I'm going to make. For example, I'm looking for somebody who has exercised decision-making ability. Isn't it frustrating that when we try to get something done, we have to go to somebody and they can't decide? I mean, that drives you crazy, doesn't it, as an employee? 2, somebody that's exercised good judgment. Black ice in the morning and people are late for work, but we have a policy you're not supposed to be late. Well, if there's a reason as to why you're late, that should be adjudicated by that supervisor who should make a judgment about whether they hold that person accountable or not. Somebody who is got a good work habits, comes to work on time, who's an example for the rest of the crowd, not somebody who's floating in but telling you to come in on time but doesn't show the example by virtue of how they act. Points like that, there's 5 or 6 of them. Decision-making, judgmental things, ability to have a good work habits, all those things make some sense to the employees. Now, as you pass that piece of paper around and that person's hired, it might be somebody in the room who's been eligible for that job but has long-term seniority but doesn't have any of those good work habits or has poor judgment skills. Well, they're not selected. So when they go back out to the organization and say, I didn't get the job because the manager of the department was unfair to me and hired his friend. Employees know why you chose. See, they understand the reasons and rationale that went in your head when you made those decisions. So it's those kinds of things that are little techniques that help people appreciate who you are and where you're coming from. Another quick example is I always take a 3x5 card and pass it out to the individual employees and ask them to list the names of the people on the A side of the card who you think are pretty good workers. And then on the B side of the card with your indelible ink, write the name of the people that you think are marginal employees. And then you wager. I'll bet you a case of good whiskey, if you're into that, or good coffee, or whatever it might be, that the A side of the card will be bigger than the longer list-wise than the B side of the card. And how can I say that with just confidence? And eventually somebody will say, well, because you can't kid your fellow worker. We know who's doing this. So the job of the supervisors and managers and organizations is to make the B's A's. And otherwise, the A's become B's. So it's sort of a synthesis of how you should be looking at the management processes as I see them. Anyway, that's...
both tied to management and leadership and communication,
right, yes.
Because those 3 are different, but they're all tied together. And I think that was something that I was really... we have points in our lives when major things happen, and I've been blessed to have 3 or 4 really strong leaders mentor me. What I will tell you is the most exhilarating time of my career were those years when we were doing that turnaround, because you and I just clicked. Like that description you just made is what I've done throughout my career, where you come in and you allow the people there to tell you what they think.
Right.
And then, like you said, if you trust them, they will come back with a pretty fair list, and the B list will be pretty common.
Right.
There'll be 3 or 4 names on that B list that come back again and again. And you as the leader then know, well, everybody thinks Pete stinks. And then the other ones you're able to try and coach. So I think that kind of communication that we had with that team, and we saw a dramatic turnaround in a short time. We went from a pretty significant loss to a pretty significant profit. But more importantly, the culture shifted. And that culture shift was because of leadership, communication, and management. And leadership and management are 2 very different things. And the communication within that management is what really makes it different. It's what makes leadership different is there's a different level of communication.
Yeah, the capacity to explain things to people and to have them, that's the standard. We're gonna make this happen, guys, based upon what you've given me for information. That basis is you can build upon that to make that particular issue a success in that particular department or company. It's an interesting process, but it's an imperfect one. And, books after books after books are written about management. But I think that if people can understand that the nature of the beast, I think this is an old book. Toffler wrote the book on change, and change is the status quo. I mean, it's constantly updated. I mean, we're sitting here in a room full of technology that, 10 years ago this is all kind of big new stuff. And I think the ability to stay current, to know what's going on and why is so critically important without being an arrogant turkey when you talk to people about how it is that they should do A, B, or C.
Well, that gives me the chance to put you on the spot, boss. So here we go. So this show is about no bullshit marketing, and no bullshit marketing involves communication, involves leadership. So putting you on the spot, look back on a time in your career when maybe you were the difficult boss, the challenging employer. Maybe you didn't communicate as well as you needed to the board or to your peers or to your subs. What did you do to change it? What did you learn from it that can help our audience?
Yeah, I think we all have our ups and downs. It was a couple of a position I took in one particular locale did not work out well, and I think in retrospect it was more me than the organization. I did not explain things the way I should have, and there was an expectation that I was not intolerant, but just impatient with the fact that I still probably suffer from that. Why can't you see that? Why can't you understand that needs to be done? I mean, it's obvious. Well, it isn't obvious. And if it's not obvious, people will not get on with it. So in kind of reflecting on what is it that you need to do differently, then kind of that reassessment of sitting down with somebody and saying, give me the feedback. There's a couple of exercises we do in some of the training sessions for Management 101 here where we are trying to avoid labor problems. And we talk about how they're assessed. How do you see it? Do you lead people or do you manage people? And there, as you pointed out, there's a great difference. Managing people. Are people resources or are they just simply souls that you push around because you push buttons and want to get things done? How do people perceive you in the organization? Do they see you as helper or do they see you as an obstacle? I mean, all those points kind of reflect, that's why it's so complicated. And that's why if in a perfect world, we wouldn't need management, would we? If we all could, what we do. So we have to keep working to refine our product, that product being how you lead others in getting the job done.
So when you were in that position, because I look back too, and at the time that I was in a place where I was not the best me, I knew something was wrong and I knew I was part of the problem. But over time, you begin to see parts that, yeah, that was definitely me, but this was definitely the culture. Ugh, that's something I wish I could have back. And that one was still the culture. During the time that you were at that position, that when you were kind of the BSer because you weren't communicating as well as you would like, how much did you know at that time and how much more did you gain over time?
Yeah, I think, it's some of it's maturity. You do different jobs at different times. Time goes by and you can figure out and you reflect on it. Sometimes you have to get hit in the head with the obvious. There was a clinician that I had in a serious health problem. This was an institution in the East Coast that had some serious, I think, issues with regard to the delivery of health care. And I brought this fella in, and he looked at it, and he reminded me that, I could be Sisyphus here and push this thing uphill, but it ain't going to work. There's got to be a way around that. And he gave me some sanguine advice to say, sit down now and think about what you really want to get accomplished. Reassess yourself here. And he did. And it was very helpful because as a result of that coaching and that counseling from somebody who I didn't like what I was hearing, but sometimes you have to accept that, and I should accept it if you think it's valuable, and it was. It really helped make the change, and that stuck with me a lot with this particular individual physician who was wise and very, very, very philosophical on how he would approach that. And of course, as a BC kid, you got, philosophy is, you always minor in that basically at the school. So I really think that learning process was helpful to me, where you get hit in the head and I didn't like it, but I learned from it.
Check out this quote from Esquire magazine. One of the country's leading specialty stores for selection and service. Don't leave Pittsburgh without your little black bag filled with beautiful fashions from the city's premier family-owned clothier for men and women. Experience the highest quality designer and private label collections, impeccable customer service, and custom tailoring that have been Laramore's hallmark for more than 75 years. Now that's an endorsement. Shop online at laramores.com or in-store downtown Pittsburgh. It's the No BS Marketing Show. I'm your host, Dave Mastovich, having a truly great time because George Hartnett is on the show. And George is a leader who has had a profound impact on me as a mentor. From observing him, from having him coach me directly, the things that George talks about made a huge impact on me. So my sons probably don't listen to the show much, George, but I'm going to force them to listen to these 2 episodes because they've heard some of the phrases that I've used over the years from you, and one being a moral compass, another phrase you always talked about, draconian. But one of my favorite ones that my entire team at Mass Solutions has heard me say a lot, and you taught me this, and I kind of instinctively knew it. Like you talked earlier in episode 1 about how parents make such a big role. I'm so fortunate that my heroes are my mom and dad, how much they instilled in me that moral compass and to look at yourself and be self-aware. In fact, I'm probably too self-critical like my mom. But the thing that you said, this phrase that is so powerful, is you said, trust begats trust. And you said to me, I've said this a couple times on other shows, you jokingly called me Bullet. And you said, Bullet, trust begets trust, and it's going to burn you. There's going to be time you trusted someone that wasn't worthy of it, and that time's going to burn you. But you can't fixate on that because there's 50 people you trusted that it was worth doing. So that impacted me for a long time.
I think that there's an opportunity to kind of make illustrations after illustration on that particular point. Of course, this military service, it's a trust because you get to cover on each other's backs. That would certainly be one that reinforces it. And then secondly, I think that in the jobs that I've experienced, when you come at something with the idea that I'm counting on you, how can I help you get that accomplished? Do you think you can get that done? You don't tell me you can get it done if you can't. Hopefully I give you an assignment that's within reason, but I trust that you'll get that done well. And then come back and talk to me about it if you having some problems. Now, in your case, when you were in that institution, we started off together. We had some contracts, if I recall correctly, that were sort of, I don't know how they were put together, but they were certainly not.
We both inherited a lot of stuff.
They weren't not in the best interest of the organization. And so we ended up having to deal with one. And I will never forget there was a meeting, I think you were in the room, and the particular physician involved came with his lawyer.
Yes.
To chastise the fact that he was being summoned to this boardroom to explain why certain things were not being accomplished that were under the contract.
I can see it.
And I said, it's remarkable to me that you have to come with a lawyer. It tells me right away what the problem is. It's you. You're trying to cover yourself for something you haven't done. But we trust that you would get this job done, but the attitude was a very negative one. In that case, we had to sever that. And in spite of threats of lawsuits, it never went down because they didn't produce under that particular agreement. But those are some of the things that kind of solidify the fact that you were right. On the other hand, there are times maybe you make a decision about something that you're not right. Admit it. Yeah, I blew it. Some of the stuff that's going on in the political scene today, everybody's walking around apologetically suggesting that they're done something wrong. Well, they did something wrong. They know they did it, and they're going to do the dance and hide it in some other way. It's just the wrong thing to do, and I'm not trying to be a moralist here, but I do think it's sad that it's come to that.
Well, what with the trust begat trust issue is that when you really trust someone, like when you trusted me, I have to tell two stories because it's my show, so everybody has to indulge me.
That's great.
So the two stories I have to tell is, now, I'm probably 26, 27 years old, and we have 6 days cash on hand, and we're losing a lot of money, and I get brought in, and I'm brought in by a CEO to help do a turnaround. I'm there, I think, 30, 60, maybe 90 days, and they whack the CEO and bring you in. And I can't believe I did this, but I wish I were still that guy because that guy had some courage. Our first ever meeting, you shake my hand at the mixer we had for you. And I said, can I see you tomorrow morning? And it's going to be your first day on the job. And you said, yeah. And I come walking in and I had to print out, and I handed you a printout. And I said, here's what I think you should address in your first 100 days. And you gave me a look like, who's this little shit? And what do you think? But then I remember at the end of the meeting, you went, you got a couple of these right.
Well, it's actually you did. You had some pretty good ideas. But, you instinctively, given your, just time and grade, not just all the educational stuff, but just watching people, getting to know them a little bit, there's a sense. And I guess the gift I like to believe I've inherited, I'd like to believe, maybe I don't have it totally, is my dad had an instinct. He could see through things in a way that was very, very remarkable to me. I mean, I remember as a boy, we'd going up and he'd be working as a general contractor. Wasn't very, very, heavy-duty guy. Had a lot of, used to box, physically a big man, powerful guy, but, he had his weaknesses. But I tell you, he could spot somebody that was a phony. I've never seen anything like it. In fact, as a kid, remarkable, we were going to, I think in Winthrop, Massachusetts, driving down someplace, and he met somebody, and he was careful, but he came back out and got on the car again, and I met this guy, and I was probably 6 or 7 or 8 years old, and I remember him telling me, that guy is full of shit. And he was. And I don't know, he had that instinct, so sometimes you can abuse that, but it seems to me that you get a feel for somebody real quickly in terms of the marketplace. And in your instance, you showed the initiative to put together stuff on paper. Other people come in and they just, they're fearful or they're shaky or they're not able to. Now, it may have been a cover because you were scared and you wanted to do something that would have been fine. But it said to me that this guy has some initiative, which I was looking for.
Well, one of the things that you met at our 13th anniversary party, you had a chance to meet another guy who understands me really well. And that's what I think why I was so invigorated by the time spent with you is you understood how to motivate me because I'm a handful. And this other guy is Chuck Canaris, who you met him, and he's my Vistage chair. And both of you are able to sense when I'm going to go down a path with what a friend of mine calls head trash. He does sales training,
right, yeah.
And he talks about head trash. And we all have head trash. And my head trash is such that I put up on my own obstacles. So one of the things that you sensed about me, it's the second story, is you knew that I could do certain things, but you knew that I would sometimes lack the confidence, so I would argue with you to not do that. So one story, folks, that you have to hear, no BSers, is some serious no BS. George had me taking these contracts with physicians, and I was leading these physicians. I was giving them the fair shake like he said to do. I'd meet with them, and I'd tell them, are you going to agree to this? You're going to agree to that? And then I would track everything. I'd go back and tell them, you didn't meet this, you didn't meet that. So there's one particular powerful doctor who we had got to the point where you would come in and meet with me, and each week I'd say, okay, here's what's happened. He's not improving. And so the one day you said, we're going to have a meeting with him and we're going to exit him and let's walk through it. Tell me how you do it. And so I presented to you how we would exit this guy. And you go, that's what we'll do. And I handed you the sheet of paper and you go, you had your assistant set the meeting up. So you go to set the meeting up and you know how I am. So you knew I wouldn't have been comfortable with this meeting. So I have the sheet printed up of what you're going to say and you have the sheet and you bring the doctor in and you go, Dr. So-and-so, Dave's got something to take care of. I'm going to be right down the hall on the phone. But if you need me, Dave, I'm down the hall. And I about shit myself because now you had me firing a doctor who was making $500,000 a year. And where I came from, doctors were put on a pedestal and I got through it. But I remember my voice got all raspy and I was dry mouth and everything. But
well, it's never easy and it should never be easy to take somebody who's in a position of responsibility and have to take them out for whatever reason. Competence, job performance, whatever the issue is, it's legitimate, assuming you've done your homework. But it should always bother you it should always bother you. And you learn from those lessons because the next time you have to do that, and it's not because you want to. In your mind, you review this, you rehearse it. Is it something I really need to do, or is there some other option here that makes sense that still gets the job done? That's critically important in your thinking process. If you don't get that accomplished, you're not being a good leader. And you're not being a responsible person in managing others.
That's a great point because one of the things that I felt we did there, and I've tried to do this at UPMC. I did this a lot, and that was a very difficult culture, but I did this a lot, is you go through every opportunity. And that particular doctor, we had given him about 4 unique chances to fix it. Mm-hmm. And by the 4th one, I think I even lobbied for the 4th one, and you were like, no, this 3rd one's enough. But once you do it 4 times, I didn't feel guilty. I was just scared.
Yeah, right. Well, it is uncomfortable. I mean, confrontations are never easy stuff. I mean, to enjoy that is not really being a normal person. But unless you get off on that kind of thing, I don't. I always was bothered by that. And I think in grad school, there was a couple of kids that were kind of bragging about how they were running their own little companies and how they were bossy and how they were able to let people go. Almost like they were prideful in that. And that's the last thing you want to do as a resort because that's an asset. You've invested in that. I mean, if just from a selfish perspective, you've got economic ties to these individuals you've cultured and brought along, and they have some value and some worth. So you want to think about that carefully but don't avoid making the decision and try to talk yourself out of it because that's not in the best interest of the company, the person, or whatever is to be done by that particular department.
And I agree with you. My mom and dad and you and the Tony Lombardis and the Chuck Canarises and the John Dames that I've been blessed to work with, these talented leaders, I instill that in anyone that works with me. And even as a father, I instill that. I say to Alec, Brevin, and Carter, it's about the tough decisions in life have to be made. Avoiding them doesn't mean that they go away.
Right.
You have to address them. You have to be fair to other people. As a coach, the players that play for me know I was fair and they know I know my stuff. They can be frustrated that they didn't play as much. But the fact of the matter is they walk away going, well, He does know the game, and he did give me a shot. And that's what you have to do in the workplace too.
Yeah, and that's back to that point about, sharing the job description and going through the points that are not on that job description that you're going to use as a thought process in making the final hire. And that when somebody doesn't get hired, they think they're entitled to it because of that long tenure they've had in the organization. And they're bad-mouthing the decision made by the manager in that particular instance. Most people can figure out, wait a minute, he told us on the front end what he was looking for, and, you've really got a bad work habit, and you're always in trouble, so why would he appoint you, even though you've been here a long time? That's really worthwhile. And I think today, we worry about I just left a company, mid-Ohio, and this company is extremely well managed. It's managed okay, but it has a philosophy that it's almost everybody gets anything they want. And what's happened is the dichotomy is now they think they need a labor union because somebody who didn't get what they wanted versus somebody else who did, or that discrepancy in how one is handled is become permanent. So the organization they're facing a labor problem where the managers aren't managing. They're not dealing with the issues, which is frustrating the good people who are part of the B's, or A's, who are becoming B's. So they think the solution is a third party, which is it's going to make it worse. In fact, they have their own agenda, so that'll make it even worse. So it's important to appreciate that people really, I think, don't want baloney or bullshit. They want the facts. Tell them that, hold them to that, and hold them accountable.
It's the No BS Marketing Show. That's George Hartnett. I also want to mention, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention someone else as a leader, David Smith, who is why I'm doing a podcast today. He taught me radio when I was a teenager and led me long after I was a teenager, gave me great leadership, mentoring, and coaching, and a good overall, just a person of character. So these kind of leaders that you're touched with, you have to thank them, and then you have to pass that on and pay it forward because you've been paid already. So, George, 2 more questions. The first one is, do you have a tool or a tip? You've given a lot of great advice throughout this show, so you can continue on that path and give a tip. But do you have any tools that you would recommend to our audience, tool or tip that you'd recommend to our audience that could improve their productivity, help them as a leader, help them as a manager or a communicator?
Well, I should have brought my stuff in fact, I'll send it to you. I'll send you some materials that you can use it any way you want to. But I think it comes back to the person. Who are you? What are you trying to accomplish, and why? And spend some quality time with the people to tell them why. If nothing else, that's what I see is so apparently missing in many of the organizations I work with. The arrogance of a manager or the insecurity of the manager forces ones to make decisions that are just, people are surviving as opposed to doing their job. So are you creating the environment as a leader in your organization that allows people to take a risk, are not punished for making a mistake, they learn from it? Is that around? Is that environment healthy? Is that opportunity there? Or if you do a self-assessment, we kind of over-control things, or we're micromanaging people to the point we don't let them fly and have some fun, like you did with your initial interview with me, and you had your list of stuff to do, and some of them were quite good. They really were. I was equally uncomfortable. I mean, I was a brand new guy there too. I didn't know who this guy is, but you're trying to figure it all out in that short period of time. So it did work out well. You did a good job.
Thank you.
Anyway.
Was there anything you thought I'd ask you on the show that I haven't?
No. You sent me a little bit of a flow sheet, which I think is pretty good, but you did a good job. I hope that I answered some of those questions intelligently.
Definitely.
I guess the bottom line is that in all of my career, from thinking back in the tent city and Mr. Liss all the way through to my current responsibilities, I just am more convinced than ever that the individual leader, person and responsible, spending quality time with their particular staff is so important, so that the focus of the company is owned by the people that are asked to run parts of it. That the extent to which they own it, they understand it. At BC, I was asked to come back once to talk a little bit about some management stuff, and I was a little frustrated because I was seeing that there was less emphasis on the middle managers who didn't own the company. They were it was a top dog kind of organization, and there's not enough, in my view, my humble opinion, of people who are closest to the folks that are doing the job. Those are the keys. If those are the ones that you really should focus on. If they own it, they want it to happen, it'll happen.
George, thanks for being on the show, but also thanks for the impact you've made on me in my career.
Well, thank you for allowing me to do that. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed working with you. You helped me a lot. You don't realize you did, but you did. So thanks again.
And thank you, our listeners, for being a part of the No Bullshit Marketing Show. You're what makes it continue to grow. Thanks for joining us for the No BS Marketing Show, brought to you by Laramore's Men's and Women's Designer Clothing. Free shipping, free returns. Shop men's and women's designer clothing, shoes, accessories, jewelry, and more online at laramores.com or in-store downtown Pittsburgh. Visit masssolutions.biz for show notes, plus additional marketing and messaging resources like our No BS Marketing Weekly Update. Sign up and receive timely, valuable ideas to improve your marketing and transform your message. Again, visit masssolutions.biz. Remember, ask yourself, what's the big idea? And build your story around the answer. It's all about bold solutions